Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be this fine day. We are coming to you with another conversations on retail focused on on-shelf availability. And I have the pleasure of talking to Glenn Richey. I guess your official name is Robert Glenn Richey Jr., right? So we'll have to unpack that one a little bit because that's like 18 first names, but that's okay. We'll get into that here
Yes.
in a second. But Glenn, why don't you go ahead and you're unmuted. Tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit of background of how you came to get into the supply chain area.
Kind of an interesting thing. I think it's like most people, Mike. It's I didn't find supply chain; it found me. Is kind of the way those things happen. Yeah. So I'm Glenn Richey. I don't go by Robert only because that was my father's name and now my son's name. The Scottish heritage. I guess we're not very creative. We use a lot of first names. Uh, Actually, these are last names. All of my first name looking names are last names from that part of the world. So I got into supply chain management after undergrad, like a lot of people do. I thought I was going to be in a sales career somewhere. My family kind of had a tradition and history of being in those types of jobs. And it was a time period in the early 90s when things were pretty rocky in sales and the economy was doing some different things. And I was in a management training program after doing some work in co-ops in manufacturing. And I was just sure I was going to end up out of that program in sales and ended up in purchasing, right? So,
Oh,
uh,
the other side of the desk.
yeah, exactly, which is kind of a shock, right? But was a great experience. Genuine Parts Company, SP Richards Company, put me through the paces for about 9 years in the wholesaling realm, where we did a lot of retail consulting with small to mid-sized retailers. Also did some fill-in supply for major players like those folks up in Bentonville.
Mhm.
That's kind of where my history took me. So happy that it did. It's been a fantastic career to be in. Now, I might not have said that in 2020 during the COVID disruption crisis, but I mean, supply chain managers, their job is to try to fix those types of problems. So we had some of those revealed at the time.
Nice. Actually, it's funny that you say that because I do a lot of guest speaking at the University of Arkansas supply chain with Matt Waller and Brent Williams and Donnie and all those folks. And I usually have the first question is like, how many of you ever heard of supply chain before 2020? And like
Yeah.
five people raised their hands, right? And most of them are supply chain career path people. If there's anything that good that came out of COVID, everybody understands supply chain is important.
Yeah. I
That's
know
about
that's
the
very
only
true.
thing that came out of that. But there was a whole realization that said, hey, supply chain is important and we take it for granted. And there's opportunities in the supply chain area. So I'm not sure that you guys put that together as a recruiting video, but it did certainly drive a lot of interest of people who've gone from what the heck is supply chain to, wow, it's really important because there's containers in the middle of the ship that can't get unloaded. And man, we got to figure out this stuff. So, in some respects, it may be a blessing in disguise. I mean, I would never want to say a global pandemic is a blessing for sure, but it did help people realize the importance of supply chain, right?
I think that's totally true. And, it also showed us some of our weaknesses and those types of things, global displacement and the kind of the distances. And, some of the type products that are difficult to get. Pharmaceuticals come to mind as one of those areas that was really problematic and maybe not talked about as much as it probably should have been. So, yeah,
Mhm.
Mike, on a normal day, I don't get a call asked to speak to Congress, but that does happen after we screw up the supply chains globally for a couple of years. So, and I will say that one of my comments to them, and one of my very first comments to them, similar to what you're saying, is to tell them that there is no the supply chain, right? This is a massive network and web of different organizations that come together to get the product where it needs to be. And if it was the supply chain, the two of us could fix it. But that's
Mhm.
the problem is that
Great
it's
perspective. Great perspective.
not
Well,
multiple.
let's unpack a little bit about you. And I told you I was going to ask this question because this is really a trick question if I don't. So you have been part of the supply chain and obviously part of Auburn University for a while. You've got a lot of associates and colleagues and family, et cetera. Tell one thing about yourself that maybe a lot of people don't know. I think this would be interesting.
Okay, well, yeah. So I worked at a number of universities now. A couple of them have pretty good football teams, right? So that makes for a kind of interesting transition when you move from Oklahoma to Alabama to Auburn,
Yeah.
which I think some people would call me, Benedict Auburn, for that move from Alabama to Auburn. But sports are a big thing on university campuses, and I've been involved to some degree or the other. Probably most of my colleagues don't know that I started my college career at South Alabama as a soccer player. I don't look like that today, but
Soccer.
I was a goalkeeper at the University of South Alabama to start my career. But there's a bit of irony there, because when I ended up at the University of Alabama a couple of years after being on staff there, a guy named Nick Saban asked if I would be able to step in and maybe do some recruiting for the football program at Alabama. So I'm a former college soccer player who did recruiting for football at the rival school from where I work today, Auburn
Oh
University.
my gosh. All right. So when for those of you who don't know, you want to talk about a rivalry, Alabama versus Auburn is one of the most noted. What side of the field do you sit on, Mr. Richey?
I mean, I always love to root for Auburn, but sometimes when it comes point to point, you got to stay with the people that brought you there. My undergraduate degree is from the University of Alabama. So yeah. And then you got to have Oklahoma in there too. It's very confusing for me and for a lot of people here too.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Well, that's awesome. What a great soundbite. Well, we're going to get into supply chain. Supply chain is really the purpose of the topic here, but I love to ask this question every time I talk to somebody, because in terms of being a supply chain professional, you're also a customer. You go into stores every single day to buy things you want. I spend a lot of time in Home Depot and Lowe's because I'm just kind of like that kind of stuff. And there have been times where I have looked for a specific wrench or a specific part for a specific project, and they don't have it. And I've told those stories multiple times of how frustrating that is from a customer experience. So walk us through. I'm sure you've had an experience over the last 6 to 12 months where you went into a store expecting to pick something up and you were disappointed. Please don't say who it was.
Okay.
We don't need that. We don't need that whole thing. You can just, if it was a big box retailer that does do it yourself, you can say one of those big box retailers is fine.
Yeah.
As much as you could tell us, because you're a customer as well, I'd love to hear your side of the being disappointed at the store shelf.
Well, all of the supply chain work we do, whether it's research or teaching these days, it all starts with the customer, and the old days of shoving it down people's throats just doesn't work, and it puts companies in a really poor financial position. So when I'm probably hypercritical about this stuff, Mike, because I go in and go, where's the damn stuff? It ought to be here. And as a guy that spent a good bit of his career in wholesaling, on-shelf availability is key for us. We are the ones expected to make sure that the product's there. So I'm talking about 99.9, 99.6% inventory accuracy and availability at all time. And those were the old standards. And so when I walk into the retail venue where I used to do a lot of consulting and can't find whatever it is, I do get upset. And I also know from the research that that's the trigger point where people decide to buy elsewhere. And so if you're running that brick and mortar facility, like you were just talking about, whether it be this do-it-yourself or that do-it-yourself, if the product's not at one and you find it at the other, you're pretty much destined to go back to that store where you found the product the last time. And that means the store that had the basket of product has lost all of those orders from that customer. And we all know the cost of trying to reconvert customers. My issues, and the ones that I run into, tend to happen in the grocery business more than anywhere else. It's a place that I think most of us go to weekly, or at least every couple of weeks. Some of us go every couple of days. And I've done a lot of supply chain finance teaching in the grocery food business. So I'm the one that does most of the shopping in this family. And when the product's not there, you're irritated, especially when it's some of these companies that specialize in organic products or specific health-oriented things that you're going. And if they don't have it, the only other place to take a look is online, right? And so you make that tradition to see if it's online. The brick and mortar store works kind of as a showroom, which is not what they want to do. And probably the worst of all is that, all of the quality that we add from the supply chain really deals with demand and supply balance.
Right.
And you can never get to the demand and supply balance if you don't know what you didn't sell. So during my comprehensive exams in my PhD program at Oklahoma, the dean slipped a little question into my oral exams that I didn't know it was him. Dean Rodney Evans, great guy, super mentor. And the thing just said, how do you account for lost sales in a grocery setting due to poor inventory accuracy? And I wrote this thing, Mike, this must have been 7 or 8 pages thing. And the answer to the question was you can't, right?
Okay.
And so I spelled this out in the oral thing and everything. And Dean Evans looked at me and said, do you believe that shit? So that's kind of, the real life practical type of professor I had to become after that discussion. And you don't, right? So if that bottle of kombucha that was hot last week doesn't get sold, doesn't end up on the shelf, then who knows how many you missed. And so what do? Do you extrapolate and go long and hope you're right that you missed a bunch of sales? Because unless the customer comes up to the front desk, you just don't know.
Right.
So, we went through a period in the 90s where it seemed like everybody was going to low inventory, closer at the retail impact, to have fewer items on the shelf, a little tighter type inventory, and rely on the suppliers to fill quickly. And I think we found, during the COVID crisis that we weren't as streamlined and healthy as we thought we were, which puts the retailers at extreme risk, right? So, so that's the kind of crazy stuff that goes through my head when my favorite bottle of kombucha is not on the shelf at the grocery store. Right?
So unpack that one. I'm gonna double dig. Okay, so that I don't even know what kombucha is. I guess that's is that a sauce or a liquor?
It's a drink. It's a drink. Yeah.
Thank you. Kombucha.
Probiotic drink. Yeah.
It must be an Auburn thing. Don't know what that is. We don't drink that here in Arkansas. That's all I can tell you. I don't even know what it is. But all right, so it's not there. What do you do?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first choice is, do you swap to another brand?
Okay.
And, I picked that category because the brands are very different. There's a lot of loyalty specifically to the different products in that category. And so if it's not there, I mean, this is a consumable that you really can't buy on the internet, right? It's a refrigerated product. And so you're going to go somewhere else to try to find it. And, the customer, if they can't find it, becomes completely frustrated, and it leaves, a stain on the business, right? So the other thing that potentially could happen is, now that I've come in on Wednesday and it's not there, and I come back in the next Sunday, let's say Saturday, Sunday, and I see that it's there, then maybe I overbuy, right? Maybe I buy too much. Yeah. And so now you're not going to see me for a couple of weeks on that item. And you also don't know how to forecast for what the next several weeks will be while I'm not buying and other people may or may not be. So if it's not there, lots of bad things happen.
Got it. I want to double click on something you just said here. And I think, as I think through it, and again, I am not a academic trained professional. I would love to. I'm a Glenn Richey wannabe or a Matt Waller wannabe kind of day. But when I simple mind, I kind of think of, if the store needs product, okay, well, first off, just because it's in the store doesn't mean it's on the shelf. And so there's a whole, I may have 27 cases of it sitting in the back room, but they're not on the sales floor. You might as well be out of stock.
That's right.
Because the kiss of death is asking an associate to go, well, let me go back in the back room and check. Oh, I ain't waiting for this. This could take forever, right? But the triggers to deliver product to the store, if it's kind of a replenishment process, is threefold. 3 pieces of very simple data that I think of. Number one, how many do I have? Right? Mm-hmm. Number 2, how many do I think I'll sell today? That's kind of the forecast.
Sure.
And the third one is, if I order it today, how long before I get it?
Right.
So I'm sure there's 500 other ones you would say, but let's just say that those are the 3. Talk to us a little bit. You said inventory accuracy, and you and I were working on some stuff prior to this call that unfortunately got put on hold right now, but it was trying to measure the impact of inventory accuracy to sales. Talk to us about the impacts of things like, okay, Grant, if those are the three, how much do I have? How much am I going to sell? And when I'm going to get it? I would think when I'm going to get it is probably the most reliable. What are the challenges of trying to get a accurate sales forecast and an accurate on hand?
I mean, you and I both know that's a crazy question, right? Because there's so many things at play. And when you think back, when I think back to the late '80s, the early '90s, still had a lot of specialty shops, right? You mentioned some hardware stores earlier. Lots of those were small hardware stores, small office product stores, and the owner could walk through in the afternoon and go, need this, need that, need this, need that. And the refill would typically be overnight, which was a really nice situation. Now you've got these stores that have 200,000 square foot, and who knows how many SKUs, continually in flux, growing and shrinking and doing like the accordion to try to figure out what the right mix is. And so as we add and make those things more complex, we end up in a situation where it's more likely that we're going to have missed sales. And so, you kind of put that in your hat. I remember some of these hypermarket type stores trying to do home delivery or, direct pickup and finding out that the customer ordered 10 items and only 7 are in stock. And even though it looked like the items were in stock, well, those blue t-shirts were actually all extra small or something like that. So those needs and consistencies and the customer wanted was not there. So, I mean, all of those things have to come together. Mike, they got to be synchronized. You need to have a good business partner that can be with you on the forecasting and say, kind of know your actions, know your activities. And, all the tech that we use is very important, but there's also managerial decision-making that comes within those forecasts. And we got to have people there, high people involvement to make those types of decisions. Otherwise, somebody comes in and makes a big order. It's a one-time thing. We repeat it. And now we have money tied up in something we can't sell, which is the other side of kind of this discussion.
Great point. Well, so how does somebody from a procurement, buying, potential selling role suddenly flip the script and go into the supply chain? What was it about the supply chain that intrigued you to go and get a degree and then basically spend most of your professional life focusing on the supply chain?
Yeah, most of my life has been tied towards it. I mean, I was lucky enough, I guess, to get tied with Genuine Parts Company, which is an outstanding distribution business, very, very cost focused, and very, very service quality oriented. So a good portion of my training came, from that experience with that company that kind of opened my eyes to these crazy distribution networks, all the relationships between business to business marketing, business to business management. And I could also see, I guess, at the time that the world was changing, that the information tech was becoming much stronger. People were starting to move more towards e-commerce. Not that they were even there, but certainly they were moving towards e-commerce when I started to get involved in this. And on the finance side of things, people were saying, we're cutting out the middleman. We're going to get rid of wholesalers. This is how we're going to save money. But the reality of the supply chain network was there's no way that could happen because there were too many customers at the end, right? So you can have major manufacturers deliver to, a major retailer, but you probably can't have major manufacturers deliver every customer, right? And so kind of saw that activity going on, the rise of third-party players, and got really interested in it. And, then sometime along the way, I decided I'd leave the real world and study it from the other side, right? And so, nice. I mean, I think it's a dynamic field. It's always changing. And, as somebody that started this thing out as a goalkeeper, you're trying to keep all the balls out of the net, but in play. And at least, have your head on a swivel so you can see what the next disruption is, what the next problem is.
Awesome. Well, this particular channel, and frankly, a lot of what I do is all focused on on-shelf availability. And people are like, well, supply chain and on-shelf availability are the same thing. Well, no, they're not. Because I would argue you can have a very perfect setup supply chain that delivers product to a store, but because of operational challenges, it's not where it's supposed to be. So I'm going to exclude those for a second.
Yeah.
But as we think about on-shelf availability, the supply chain, And I don't know if you've ever seen this video. I saw it a few times. I've given it in classes, which is how a number two pencil is made. Have you ever seen this? And it's got 40,000 people working together and trying to figure out, I got rubber from here and metal from here and lead from here. And you go, how do we have any pencils at all? I mean, it's like just so complicated, but that's a small fraction of the complexity of the supply chain. So what is a supply chain? How, as I think about all the different ways that customers can buy, omni-channel, brick and mortar, combination of pickup and BOPIS and ROPIS and all those other kinds of real things with which is buy online, pick up in store, and then doing research. What role does the supply chain play in making sure that product's available for the customer, no matter where, however they want it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we have, forecasting techniques that involve cooperating with a lot of different players, right? And I think that's really key, is to have, and we call it collaborative planning for forecasting and replenishment, right? In supply chain, we can make an acronym out of anything. So CPFR is what we talk about there. And people treat it as a real kind of strong specific program. But if you can think about it, you get the heads together across the different levels, what the manufacturer is able to do, what the distribution network is able to deliver in the amount of time that's available. And of course, there are lots of different options, and then what the needs are at the end. So, I mean, you need the retailer to be able to predict what they think the sales will be so that the manufacturer can get all of those different lines of product in place. Mm-hmm. So if you think about that funnel, you just talked about that pencil, and all the interconnections for that pencil all come back to what the customer does on the end, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's really the customer that triggers that work. But in order for the product to be on the shelf, that work's got to be in process before the forecast is even made, right?
Yep.
So those things need to be ongoing, updated, good contact. I mean, there are great companies out there, that are doing this type of thing. I know that my son will actually be in Bentonville for a couple of months this summer, actually working with our RFID lab for Walmart. So Walmart RFID lab.
Really?
Some interesting stuff. Yeah. So maybe
I need to look them up. I've spent a few years, I think 22, working on RFID for Walmart. So what's he going to be doing up there?
I'm not 100% sure. Maybe some of it's incognito, but
that's true. That's true.
It's all about getting the different technologies in place so they can support decision making. And Walmart's fantastic at that. That's certainly what they're known for.
But I can tell you, he's gonna have you calling the hogs from Auburn when you do that.
I've already got enough programs I got to root for right now, Mike. Don't do that.
I think we need to add another one, because I still haven't. I mean, now I'm going to really go off tangent. Is your mascot a tiger or an eagle?
Oh, here down here,
yeah. Which one is it? Pick one.
That's right. I mean,
which one is it? We have a Razorback. Now, I don't know what a Razorback means, but a Razorback hog is our mascot. We have one. You're the only university I know that has two.
Yeah, I will tell you that I plugged in some of this stuff into one of the AI things and was like, okay, why is the Auburn's mascot a tiger? This is probably 6 months ago. Yeah. And part of the AI spit out was that it's related to the number of tigers that are in the Alabama and Georgia region, which obviously is not true, but it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of both. More is better. I don't know. So.
I love it. All right. Well, so talk to us. We basically feels like we're on the other side of the global pandemic. But as I kind of set up before, the global pandemic was horrible in a lot of different ways. A lot of people passed away, and a lot of people were just absolutely scared to death, and all kinds of supply chain challenges too. But it did make people aware of this thing called the supply chain. So are we out of that now? Are we back to whatever normal looks like? That's kind of like 4 years later. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I feel like it depends on the product line, right? We've seen some products, heavy manufacturing, that kind of thing, really move and adjust and try to be better in terms of responsiveness. And then we see some others that have kind of gone back to business as usual, hoping that things go back to business as usual. When I think about this, and this is a part of my research agenda, is that I feel like we underestimated risk, which is quite obvious, and all of this chase toward optimization of pricing. Mm. So you start looking for partners regardless of where they are in the world, regardless of the political risk, regardless of the economic risk, and try to come up with a low landed cost coming from wherever to, and so a lot of that drove us to suppliers in China. They have, good quality support from labor. They can make some good products. I know early in manufacturing for China, they were making Christmas tree lights, right? If you think of a thing that upsets customers, when you lose one of those lights, you get upset. And so nowadays they're producing all kinds of things, right? That customers love. But that stretched us, right? It stretched us to a position where if their government makes a decision, it impacts all of our different supply chains that run through there. Not to mention the other things that we saw, health-related issues. They're having some labor-related issues now. So in all honesty, we need to do reshoring and find better backups and alternatives. And Mike, you may remember, in the early 90s, we were on a 3-call at least system with most of our suppliers. You had an A customer out there that would fill 75 to 80% of your stuff. You'd have a 50 to 20, right, with a B customer, a supplier, sorry. And then, then you'd have somebody at the bottom that's getting 3 to 5%. And it's healthy competition to want to move up that ladder. And your systems are all in place so that if one of those messes up, you can flip the switch and bring more in from the other. Now, obviously, there's contracting, there's capacity issues and that type of thing, but it at least gives us some level of support. So we've got to see more movement to that. The bad news for Western countries is that the Chinese businessmen realized this quite some time ago, probably a couple of 5-year plans ago. So I think we may have even talked that I spend some time in Africa every summer working with researchers and to help with supply chains in Central Africa. I go down to the breakfast each morning and there'll be, heavy duty, high quality business people from China in there talking to several different local Africans at each table. So it might be 5-on-1 here, 5-on-1 there, looking for opportunities to spring up businesses in locations that are nearer shoring to places like the United States and Europe. So that's an area I think that Western countries need to be more involved, especially the United States and certainly in Latin America. And if we really want to see that move away from the disruption we ended up in, we need to become more responsive, right? We need to be thinking about flexibility, adaptability, agility, and improvising when we need to. Those are the things where the focus needs to be, not consistent optimization of our costs. And so I think we'll figure that out. Brian Gibson and I have written a few things for Accenture that I think are helping train some purchasing agents to think a little bit more broadly along those lines. And of course, then there are all kinds of other issues that come into play, like regulation, sustainability, and those types of things that we'll have to see. But I don't think we're out of it until the network's been redrawn. And then after the network's redrawn, it has to continually be adjusted, right?
So I wouldn't wish this on anybody, but if 2025 we have another global pandemic, are we in a better position than we were in 2020? Or are we still in the same?
I mean, I think we're in a better position largely because strategically decision makers and supply chains have had to go out and look and see what the options are. Now, whether they've made the change or whether they've been able to build infrastructure into a new place to source product, or how about a new issue in terms of labor, actually training these people up so they can do the work, and these parts of the world where we really don't always get product are huge, important issues. So,
Well, so in some respects, we're at least more aware of them, that what we need to do. The work's probably not finished yet.
Yeah, and I think some of the move towards domestic manufacturing in the United States has helped. We've seen some growth. I'd rather see more of the physical buildings than the numbers that are reported by the media. Yeah. But the idea is there, whether you're talking about pharmaceuticals or chips or what have you. The intention to make sure that there's a guaranteed source of supply somewhere nearby is very important. So I feel like we're better, but I know we still have a lot of issues.
So this is a broad question, but what product categories are we most at risk that we import either from China or Latin America or Europe, et cetera, versus what we have control over just here in the U.S.? Where are we at risk?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, I think that when you think about high tech that we don't produce, we're at risk there. Component parts, those types of things that go into high tech, especially with maintenance. When we think about the supply chain and and trucks and that type of thing, those things fit into that category as well, right? The sensors and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty important issue. I think something that we definitely need to be concerned about. The food supply chains come from all over the place, depending on the year, and we've seen some fluctuations with that, even out of Ukraine with the issues they've had there. Now, a number of our Latin American suppliers don't have the fertilizers that they usually would buy, which is always an interesting phone call to get when you're a professor and they're asking you, do you know where we can get a fill-in for our furniture, for our fertilizer supplier?
Wow.
From Ukraine, and you go, well, I could theoretically tell you something, but that's kind of a specialty area.
Wow. Yeah.
So I think that the food supply chain is also not that it's completely in trouble, but I do think it's at risk.
Yeah.
But we try to do things to make those things resilient. Those are two that come to mind. Obviously, pharmaceuticals is one that's been on the tongues of a lot of people because of the amount of manufacturing that happens in Asia.
Yeah.
So those are major areas that make me think we should be concerned about that. But we could also have a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico and customers could buy up all the toilet paper tomorrow. So
yeah.
So
for sure. Well, I think those are a couple of areas you're talking about. It's not necessarily an on-shelf availability issue, but I know the area that I spent a lot of time for the last 20 years is RFID. And RFID for pharmaceuticals and RFID for food is on the explosion. It is absolutely growing because people want to know for two things. Number one, I need to know exactly what I have and where is it located real time to the degree I can. Number two, I've got to have things to put safety measures in to make sure, hey, has this product always been in cold chain compliance, or did it get above a certain level? Or is this really a manufactured pharmaceutical, or is it a product ripoff or an authentication issue? So how do you do that? Part of the way you do that is you get down below the UPC level and you get to a serialized information to say, these are all unique ones that Merrick built. I don't know who else is saying this, but if it's not these serial numbers, it's not legitimate product. And that's a big part of what pharmaceuticals is trying to do. And RFID is actually playing a pretty important role to make sure that they authenticate that.
Absolutely.
So let's flip a little bit, because I and again, you and I have probably been in this business about the same amount of time, but what I have seen is we are really good at sharing data within the companies.
Right.
So if I'm a raw material supplier, let's just take diapers or paper towels that you use in your home. Mm-hmm. There's a set of raw material suppliers who are cutting down trees. I'm sure I just made a whole bunch of people mad, but yeah, we cut down trees to make paper, right? They've got their systems really, really well that knows what they've cut down and where it is, et cetera. Then there's this big wall, and then we've got suppliers like a Procter & Gamble who take that raw material and actually turn it into a diaper or a paper towel. They've got their systems that track things inside their walls pretty well. And then you've got retailers like a Walmart who've got good systems that are, again, inside their retail. But we got these big buckets where outside these companies, we don't do a really good job of sharing, certainly systemically. Now, people say, well, yeah, we do purchase orders and invoices, and that's all electronic data. But that's transactional. I'm talking about really sharing data. What's your vision of what the data sharing needs look like? How far we've come, and what are the opportunities? Do you think that will help some of the supply chain visibility we need for the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's an area that we've been looking at here in our research team at Auburn for some time. I mean, this thing started probably 12, 13 years ago, talking about big data around the world and seeing how these people, were they sharing, what's the interconnection? And we were, I won't say flabbergasted, but surprised in a number of areas. You would talk to U.S. executives, they would say we share everything, which it's not true. We talk to Chinese executives and they would say we get nothing, which you also know is not true. We talk to a Turkish executive who says we don't share our data with our strategic business units because we're afraid one of them might get bought by a competitor and then we would lose that data. Yeah. So on one side, it's this bridge for complete transparency on everything, and maybe on the other side, it's we're afraid of regulation, and so let's be very careful as to what we share at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the unfortunate thing with this blockchain technology, which has been, it has a lot of really positive benefits, still has a ways to go before it can be used appropriately,
Yep.
has shown that we're not as comfortable as we think we are with sharing a lot of data.
Mhm.
And for me, when I look at the blockchain tech related to what's on the shelf in the store, I mean, that is a great opportunity to be able to see transparently through what's going on. You can look and trace, not only visually see where it is, but you can trace where it's been. And so combining RFID with the blockchain is would be brilliant, right? It would give
Yeah.
us a lot of opportunities. But there is fear, and it's legitimate fear, that your data could be viewed by someone that could use it against you. And I think major players get concerned that maybe it's not that supplier that you've worked with all these years, or even the new supplier that you've worked with for a couple of months, but it's their suppliers. And are their suppliers looking in to see what's going on with your information, and who else are they connected with, right? So,
Mhm.
so I think there's some reason for concern there. And I mean, I think there's also backdoor security issues, right? Can we get in through the block?
Yep.
But ultimately, if you can't get all of this stuff digitalized, and you can't get it into some accessible format, then the dreams of AI that we're talking about today
Mm.
will never come true, right? Because without the data in an actionable form, then the AI technology is, telling you silly things like, at one point, I looked up my name in AI last year, and it said I was an expert in dance sport, which you can
Really?
probably tell I'm not a big dance sport person. But
No, but I would think dancing and goalie, it's the same. It's the same thing. Oh, come
same
on. You're
clothes.
kind of, I mean, you're watching the ball go around the field and you're just kind of doing a little dance, and you only get excited when it's coming your way.
Yeah, that's
Fair.
right. That's right. Yeah, you're down there doing handstands until they come and see you, right? Um, no, but I think
That's good.
it's an interesting world we live in, but the problems make it fun in our business. So.
Well, now I'm going to put you on the spot because I don't know how actively you were involved, but Auburn University, and please, everybody on the phone, please do not call this the University of Auburn. I know that that drives me nuts when people say that. Auburn University, and specifically the Auburn RFID lab.
Mhm.
And I was involved with this study. I thought it was a fascinating study, but I want to say it was 2018. They did this project called the Chain Integration Pilot. And the idea was, if we really share data from raw material all the way to the shopper, that's the supply chain flow. But we shared that data backwards, what the cost opportunities would be from a better in stock and better on shelf availability and reducing claims and product authentication and all that kind of good stuff. And we really got charged up to go, yeah, we got to figure out how to do this. And there was blockchain components, and there was, I don't even know if you've heard of it, EPCIS, which is how do you share serialized data across a blockchain. I'm going to be real transparent. I've not heard any progress that we've made as an industry towards that vision of ultimately sharing that data across a supply chain. Why? It seems like a logical, number one, serialized data, which I think is the future,
Yes.
and sharing this data across the supply chain. And whether it's blockchain or EPC, I don't care about the technology. I really don't. But we haven't broken that. I've not seen anybody break that cycle, and I don't know what it's going to take to do that. What are your thoughts on that? Because that's the data sharing part.
The place where, and of course, I see a lot of this research. Blockchain's an area where in the supply chain arena, I run one of the top logistics journals in the world. So this
Okay,
stuff comes into me, and I have to read through it. I got a bunch of them to look at later on today.
got it.
But when I see the blockchain in place, I see it being used kind of throughout Europe within companies, like you talked about earlier,
Yes,
or
vertical.
yeah,
Kind
yeah,
of what I call the Nike model, where they manufacture it, distribute
yeah.
it, and sell it at retail. That it's easier to do because you've got a single organization, right?
Right. You
Okay.
see that a little bit. You see that with some of the military operations, maybe that have suppliers that they really have control over, right? And so
Yep.
they're kind of
Yeah.
tightly connected. But until you've got that web opened up, you lose that governance component, which is the thing that also adds a lot of value. I mean, that transparency vision is great, but also being in a position where you don't have to audit these things as often, they get automatically audited by other partners. those are the kind of things that I think are being missed out on. And you mentioned earlier in our discussion, you mentioned working with EDI and
Yep.
these different things. And what's sad is we always seem to come to that same point where this company has this tech, this company has that tech. They're similar, or they're even off the shelf the same, but they've adjusted them, and we can't get the data to combine. And it doesn't matter if it's the age-old EDI stuff that we were sending through a dummy computer, or this high-tech stuff that we're trying to do today. So that kind of the integration of the tech is still a big issue. And then the risk and fear, of what your partners might do. Those supply chain relationships still really lead the way in the adoption of all of these different techs and the implementation of them, I should say.
Since Auburn RFID Lab kind of sponsored that work, that chip project, has the supply chain organization at Auburn actually taken that to the next level, or is it was really just, hey, really cool piece of work, we'll put a bow on that and put it on the shelf and stuff? I'm not trying to be cynical, but it doesn't seem like we've moved the needle in terms of actually doing any of that work. And I'd really like to see that happen. I'd actually like to volunteer my time to help that happen, because I think it's a critical part of the next level of integration.
Well, that's something we should talk about for sure, because I think it's definitely an important area. They've done some other projects over there, like Project Zipper, that kind of look at similar type issues. And it just seems to always come down to those relationships between companies, which is an area that I work, but also the technical interconnections. And like I said, it's frustrating because it's the same problem. It shows up and you go, oh, I've seen this before. Right.
And I'm gonna dismiss the tech part of that, because there are technical challenges to that. But let me give you an example. When we talk about RFID on a pair of jeans is pretty straightforward. RFID, because of the water and the content, are really difficult on bottles of antifreeze and bottles of insect repellent, etc. But when big retailers like Walmart said, no, we're going to go this way, there's a lot of creative people that figured out how to put tags on that and be very, very successful. So I think the tech, if we can get the business to drive this as a direction, the tech folks will figure out how to make this work. We can put a man in the middle. We can figure out how to share data.
I agree.
I think there's two issues. Number one, there's not a driving force of why to do that today. Oh, we've got our own data. We're good. Number two, and this is a little bit of a sensitive topic, but retailers specifically have gone from, hey, we're going to make all this data free of available, take it and do whatever you want, to, oh, no, wait, we're going to monetize that. We're going to charge for it because it's a way of generating revenue to offset some of other costs. Well, now it becomes a cost of doing business, and then you got to decide whether I invest in that or not. That's a difficult thing. That makes it more difficult for sure.
Yes, right? It does. That definitely changed the way we look at data too.
So I'm gonna switch gears to a couple of things. The first is just your focus area. You'd mentioned you've got some things that you're working on. Obviously, this work that you're doing from Africa, et cetera. What are your current focus areas as an expert in the supply chain right now?
Yeah, you probably picked some of them up during the discussion, but I have been looking at supply chain tech for 20 years now, all through different types, that type of thing. More into the implementation area than and that's been, I guess, a big thing over the course of the back half of my career is attention to doing over saying. I was having a conversation with a number of researchers that look into supply chain sustainability, and I like to remind them, we kind of know we need to do this. It's always better to do things cleaner if we can. You can take the political position that you want, but we've probably talked enough about that we need to do it. And it's probably time to talk about how. Yeah. And so I just took a group of executives to South Africa on this trip. And one of the places we went is really, amazing business that does recycling across the board. And so they have a food facility that does food recycling, that does 100% zero landfill, which is amazing. But the way they do it is they use manual labor. So if you can picture some people down there pulling napkins out of food, it's something that would be very difficult to do in Western Europe or the United States. Yep. But they got to see kind of the how, right? And they're trying to recycle hospital gowns and you name it, anything that can be brought into the facility. And that how part is what we need to know more about. And of course, we've had the same thing in the technological realm, where the CEO or one of the vice presidents runs out and buys the tech, and none of the employees are ready to use it or even willing to implement it. And I was one of those executives that did something like that. So I'm a bit sensitive to those issues. So focusing on the implementation of technology, sustainability, that type of stuff, but also the strategic mindset to move away from optimization all the time and try to think categorically about how you can build a more resilient supply chain. And I believe, Mike, the way you do that, one is structurally, right? So being able to look at the structure, figure out how you change that structure and adapt it, to use a specific word, so that it's healthier, right? It's more resilient. Another thing is processes, right? We have all these processes in the facility. There are different ways we can handle product. Areas we can put it in the store, turnover, that type of thing, relationships in our contracts. We can be more flexible in that area and look for areas to be flexible with policy and with processes, right? So you think about structure, policy, process. And then in the supply chain business, as well as the retail business, we know even when we have all of those things in line, something's going to screw up. So you got to be ready to improvise, just like the old jazz artists, to be ready to do something on the fly that, helps you save the sale or opens an opportunity for you, or defends against one of those disruptions. The point is to try to limit those, right? As those happen, identify them and try to make them something that's part of the structure, the process, or the policy. And I think if business people will turn and think in that direction, that the optimization will come afterwards, right? And the optimization works within those categories. So I've been preaching this, I've been talking about this, and I'd like to be doing more transformative work in the area of nearshoring, but it's taken us a long time to get the nearshoring going. So sure. But I'll continue to preach and press and hope that there'll be more movement in that area.
Fascinating. You can use some of your sport work in the industry. What I found is when people get really elaborate and have these big grandiose plans, you almost got to get it back to, but what are you trying to get done?
Right.
And they were another 5-minute dissertation about what they want to get done. And you go, no offense, I don't understand what you're talking about. I said, if I'm a football coach in the college arena, I have a goal. I want to be national champion. I want to win my division. I mean, whatever those goals are, they are clear, they are measurable. Whether they're obtainable, that's a whole different piece. But to me, if you throw out a goal that doesn't have a number to support it, to track to see if I was up against that, we're just talking about stuff. And from my perspective, you growing up in sports and being involved all with sports, there's a lot of parallels to the business world. Because when somebody goes, I really want to do this, and what does that look like? I want to improve 5%.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, is that enough? Well, what do you mean? Because I believe a number by itself is meaningless unless you compare it to something. They go, what do you mean 5%? I go, what's our competition growing in that area?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Let me get back to you. They're growing 20%. Then is 5% enough? Yeah. No, probably not. Okay. So, right. So it's like, give me a meaningful number that I can go after. And then to your point about, we have to have flexibility. Flexibility to me, again, I hate to use a football analogy. I got a play I'm going to run to score a touchdown. Every single play is designed to score a touchdown. You can talk to any coach. But there's these things when you line up and you're about to hike the ball, it's called an audible. Yep. This play is not going to work given the defense we've been saying. We are going to call it audible, that we're going to run a little bit different variation of that because we think it'll be more successful. I don't think we have those as a supply chain. I don't think we necessarily measure things. I don't think we have. I have in my mind at the retail shelf, somebody says, what's your goal for on-shelf availability? And I said, 98%. No, why not 100? I said, because you can't afford 100%. The amount of money it would take to be 100% on the shelf, you couldn't afford, right? So I think that's the future. And I think a lot of this data sharing comes out of that, which is, well, we can't do that unless we share data. There's no way we can get there by just working in our own little silo. So I'm gonna let you react to that, and then just ask you for one more follow-up question after that. Go ahead.
I mean, I'm totally with you. I like the audible example. I mean, we call it adjustment theory, right? So that's what we're doing from our side.
Of course, it's got to have the word theory in it if it's from academia, right?
I had to say that at least once to turn everybody's brain off. But no, I mean, this whole thing about responsiveness, what I just said, fits into exactly what you're saying. And so, people that have gone through business school and dealt with Porter's five forces and SWOT analyses and these type thing, it's just trying to take a step back and look at the full network and make decisions around those items. The other thing you said, though, was about measurement. And, the old cliche about what gets measured gets done is absolutely true. Yeah. In this field, top to bottom. The problem is we really still don't have good metrics. I mean, people can wave the score model around, and you can go, how many is that? 102 variables or something like that. And I was talking with a major parcel delivery company from overseas a couple of weeks ago, and I think they said they have 4 different dashboards they're looking at right now, and he basically turns 2 of the monitors off in the morning when he comes into the office, because those are dashboards that headquarters says they need to use that they don't use in the operation. So one day, someday, maybe the two of us will come up with $1 million outcome variable, which is really what we need to know, right? Something that's to each stage in the supply chain, and they all have to live up to, but we still haven't got there. Maybe some of the use of generative AI and those algorithms talking to each other will be able to define what the most important variables are, right? What the least important variables are, and we can trim those things down. I mean, I think all of our books on forecasting and these types of analyses say 7 to 12 variables is probably what you need. So if that's the number, I'm not sure what we're going to do with 102, right? So we've got to get to the bottom on that eventually in this field and in partnership with industry to make sure we know what those variables are. And of course, you've got retailers out there that would say, well, I'm in this business, so my variables are different than theirs. And that's absolutely true as well.
Not to go full circle on this, but I can't resist. I get a chance based upon all the different retailers I work with. I'm not going to name them by name because I'll probably get in trouble for it. But my first question to them is exactly the question I said, which is on-shelf availability important to you and your customers? Well, absolutely. And they'll give me the 15 reasons why. And then my follow-up question is, what is your on-shelf availability? And 90% of the time, Glenn, what they'll answer is, well, our in-stock is 98.2%. Yeah. And I went, in all due respect, I didn't ask you what your in-stock was. I asked you what your on-shelf availability is. It's the same thing. No, it's not the same thing. Just because you have 5 cases in the back, you're in stock, but you're not on the shelf.
That's correct.
So let me ask you another question. All right, so what is your on-shelf availability? Well, we don't know. Well, don't you think if it's important to customers, that'd be something you'd measure? And they go, okay, we'll measure that. Okay, how are you going to measure it? Well, we don't know. I mean, it's fascinating because I used to ask a bunch of questions. And, well, how would you do it? And then I kind of walk them briefly through how I would do it. Yeah, we want to do that. We definitely want to do that because they realize that is an important metric and they want to figure out how to do that. Anyway, I digress. So we have had a great conversation. I really do appreciate it. I have one follow-up question for you. And I love to ask this one because you never know where it's going to go. But what did I not ask you that I should have? What's hot on your mind that's like, oh, man, I really wanted to talk about this, but I didn't get a chance? And the questions that Mike asked, what's on your mind that you'd really like to make sure that you stress to the folks about the importance of the supply chain for our industry?
Well, I think one of the things to watch out for is regulation. And that's something that we didn't talk about. We'd gone through a time period where talking about globalization and that type of thing was, you'd ask 100 people and 99 of them would say it's positive, right? We want to do open trade and this type of thing worldwide. And of course, the United States had been very strong. North America had been strong. Western Europe had been strong. China and some Asian countries had been strong as well. But now it seems to be kind of a time period where there's going to be more regulation. There's going to be more protection of customers. There's going to be more protection of national businesses specifically. And that's part of the reason why we need to see more sourcing that's closer to the customer in these different locations. Um, I've done some work, and we have the beer supply chain, which is always an interesting place
I
to
love
work
that. I love that game. Let's give
because
a bunch of college students a beer supply chain game. Great idea, Glenn.
Uh, yeah, I know, but the reality is that what that game doesn't pick up is that every state in the United States has a different regulation for beer and liquor distribution. And
Interesting.
some states require a three-tier system where a wholesaler distributor has to be at play. Some don't. Some won't let certain varieties be sold. And this is talking about one highly regulated area, but you could see those types of things start to creep into other areas, food products, technology, those types of issues. But I also think you'll see. I mean, I think Donald Trump made the comment. It's been now seven years ago, probably, that he didn't think it was a level playing field in some of these countries where we were trying to sell product.
Right.
And I know those countries think the same thing in other areas, right? That you talk to managers and we can sell here, we can't sell there. So I think that's an area where disruption will rear its ugly head, unfortunately. Some of it to protect national interests, some of it to protect the customer. And so hopefully written for positive reasons, right? That will do good things for us, but sometimes just kind of get in the way of us trying to do business. And so
Yes.
I think that's a pretty big and important area to watch how trade adjusts in this era of, how do we say this? I don't want to say anti-globalization, but less globalization, right?
Right. Well, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. And I love that. By the way, Matt Waller, Dr. Waller from the University of Arkansas, actually just stepped down as the dean of the business school there. And you know Matt very well as well. And he was going to say, I'm going to go and connect with a bunch of freshmen and talk about them about supply chain. What should I talk about? And my first comment, before I even kind of sent it out, I feel like I responded back, don't talk about anything. Make them experience the beer game. Make them go through that. Don't teach them anything. Just let them experience it. I think we do too much talking at people and we don't give them an experience. Because when you come out of that game, you come out of that game going, man, that was hard. I thought this would be an easy game. That was a hard game because I didn't have all the data. And then when you go through the second round where you're actually allowed to communicate a little bit, it becomes substantially easier. Well, that's really what we're talking about, this data sharing thing. We don't do that very well today. So fascinating.
You're 100% right.
I told Justin Patton, who's the director of the Auburn lab, and you know that he's going to be building a much bigger lab here in the very near future, like 3 to 4 times. I said, do me a favor, what we tried to do at the University of Arkansas, have a tree on one end of the lab and somebody buying diapers on the other end of the lab, and let the supply chain go through and show how these various technologies and process of sharing data across the supply chain could be something that would be advantageous. I'm still working on them. Maybe you can help them. All the listeners can go. Justin, I'm not his email out. But I think getting people to experience the challenges of the supply chain by going in and go, wow, this is really hard, will get them. Because if I am a supplier, I never spend any time as a retailer. If I'm a wholesaler, I never spend any time as a retailer or a CPG. And if I'm just cutting down trees, no offense, I have no idea how people are using the product in the stores or in the home. So, Dr. Richey, I can't thank you enough for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you. And I looked at my watch a second ago. Oh my gosh, we've been talking for an hour already, which doesn't seem like it's been more than 10 minutes. So
fantastic.
Thank you so much for your time. Hopefully this won't be the last time we pull you into this conversation, but thanks for spending our time, our leaders. The supply chain is a critically important thing, and you've really helped us provide a lot more direction on what some of the challenges are.
Well, thank you very much. I think that you made some comments about experience, and I think that being practical is very important for our students and for our researchers. And we need to stay engaged with you guys, you folks. That keeps us out of the ivory tower, right? So please have me back anytime, Mike. I really enjoyed it. And if I could do anything for any of the listeners as well, pretty easy to look up, richey@auburn.edu.
Very good. Thank you so much.
All righty. Take care.
Bye-bye.